It's part 2 of Divide Tempera with Sparta, where previously, first we walked off and conquered Epirus, not really for any particular reason, just to get past them, so that we could go and conquer Rome, and using some cheeky siege attack exploits, we took Rome from under the Roman army's noses. And now the next part of the campaign, we'll be trying not to lose it, because the Romans have tons of armies right next to us. Fortunately, only one of them comes to attack. We would have been in big trouble if they all just besieged us. But they're walking off, perhaps they want to go and fight Carthage or something. Just one stack besieging us then, that's the right amount. I'm starting a new army at Apollonia here, not necessarily because defending Apollonia is that important anymore, but because Taurus to the west is now undefended, and I still liked the idea of sneaking a fleet across, landing in the port and then capturing the city. So I started making a cheap army here to see if that opportunity would remain and maybe we'd be able to get it at some point. You can see here a couple of turns later they have now started defending the city, so we can't do it now. But more importantly, they have also now launched a siege assault on Rome. So here we go, the first of what's actually going to be quite a few fights for Rome, I'll let you know now. The enemy are fielding mostly Principes and Triarii, so a fairly elite Roman army for the period. They completely bamboozled me in this battle, so you can see here, we begin set up with this very steadfast defensive formation, a hoplite line behind the gate, more hoplites on the wall to contest the ladders, and ranged units ready to shoot down at things that come through the gate. However, immediately we're walking off this position, because while the enemy deployed in front of that gate as if they were going to storm it, at the start of the battle they turned all of their siege engines around, and started walking off to one of the other gates, so now we have to redeploy. They even have a tortoise there, the thing that can blow up walls, but for whatever reason they chose not to use it, so that will help out. I had put some barricades at this other gate, thinking if something snuck down here to try and get in, this would delay them and I wouldn't have to pay too much attention. But now the barricades are going to be in my way as I try to deploy to this wall. As a result, only a few slingers actually arrive before the enemy are storming this gate. I think our troops glitched out a little bit, because for some reason they weren't obeying movement orders here. Some guys are just chilling, staring off into the distance, not really moving up to the positions I had ordered them to go to over here. I think it's because of the barriers. A few men in each unit get stuck fighting the barrier because they're trying to pathfind to the place they're supposed to be going. And once a few guys are stuck, the rest of the unit glitches out as well. And it's just some classic Rome 2 disaster mechanics all happening. I do eventually have 1 or 2 units on the wall in a position to block the enemy ladders. Now we're going to be outnumbered in this fight because the enemy have loads of ladders, so 2 units isn't necessarily enough to stop this attack, especially because their units are essentially the same as mine. It's mostly heavy spearmen in the form of the Principes. So not a very advantageous fight, but it stops the enemy spreading out throughout the city, although they do have a ram, so they'll be opening the gate and we're ready for that behind the barriers with our hoplite phalanx. Apart from the elements of the phalanx that are on the enemy side of the barriers and are trying to fight their way back maniacally. Eventually, that gate does get opened, and now the enemy move up to fight the front of our phalanx, which is the best situation we can have really. Our line is very wide, but we have enough troops to cover the entire line here, so that's alright. You can see the barricades have a much bigger hitbox than it looks like they do, as our slinger stones are getting stuck in midair on the way over to hit those enemy cav. So that's a shame, wasting some ammo. A few enemies have managed to get past the barricades, but these 2 Principes are whipping out the old do-si-do. Just more glitching out. Generally the barricades being here is just messing up the AI on both sides, so that's great. The enemy have plenty of ranged units that are standing outside the town trying to shoot up at my guys on the walls, and once the enemy committed everything either through the gate or up the ladders, I could send my cav out via the main gate of the city to swing around and now attack all of these nice exposed ranged units. That's going to be a bunch of easy kills and routes for us. Meanwhile, the enemy commander is at the front of the queue here, trying to hack through the barricades, so I'm very much focusing on this, and I've moved my javeliniers to be just behind this part of the line. And once the enemy commander does break through, I ordered the javs and slingers to focus his unit down. Because we're in the slow combat mod, it takes a lot of ranged stuff to kill things. Generally, the slow combat mod makes ranged units less powerful, which is what the mod author was claiming in the comments anyway, because apparently people don't like powerful ranged units. So, while throwing jabs at cavalry isn't as powerful as it usually is, it's powerful enough, and in this case we do kill their general, although it doesn't note it in the replay, so we're in a good situation there. Plus, we've taken out all of those ranged units outside, just need to finish a few off. So from here, we've got the balance bar advantage, we should be able to grind to a victory, but it's going to be a real grind indeed, because both sides have a bunch of melee defense focused units. My cav are going to be all but useless, not only because in sieges they're generally less useful, but the enemy left a couple of spear units standing awkwardly in the gate, so it's hard for me to get inside the town. I did try the classic move of putting ranged units over the fights to shoot down into them. A good idea in theory, they're not really shooting very much, and as mentioned, they're less important than usual because of the mod setup. So this doesn't make much difference in practice. And yes, we've blocked a whole bunch of stuff over here on the wall. We can't really win this micro fight with a grind, but neither side are actually taking any casualties because we're all melee defense focused units, heavy spear units, so really we're just poking at each other with just a few troops from each side, minimal damage being done to our high armor, high defense units. We'll just leave that stewing away and focus on the main fight in the courtyard below, where we can maneuver a little bit. We've got a bit of space. Hoplites aren't the best unit for doing these flank attacks with, but that might just be because I'm using them in phalanx mode. You can see they kind of keep their distance because of the way that phalanxes work in Divide et Impera. You have to micromanage phalanxes to get them to shuffle forwards. It's like every time you double click they move 2 steps forwards or something like that. There's some custom rules with phalanxes, so you have to keep clicking on them to get them to close in on the target. Otherwise most of them just won't fight. Something similar is happening over here. They do get extended range when they're in phalanx, so they can attack further away than their spears can reach, making them a bit more useful than they look. Eventually we do close out and defeat this single unit of Principes on our right, freeing up these 2 units for other stuff, and one project I want to get to is clearing out the gate of those spearmen, then our cav could be more useful. I also sent a unit to go and sit at the back of the main blob. Because it's in blob formation, what's probably happening is some of the men from the leading units are also at the back, meaning making a rear attack will count as a rear attack on everything in the blob and give you lots of good morale debuffs, good value for money there. Meanwhile, up on the wall, well, a chaotic mess continues with no end in sight. After a while, we find that my rear attack with the Hoplites is actually enough to take down the blob. I didn't even need to bring in the lancers or anything like that. We gradually rout the entire blob unit by unit, and soon we have overwhelming power there. Then after that I finish the fight to clear the gatehouse from the final enemy unit on the ground, but at this stage capturing the gatehouse again doesn't help us very much. So we'll take out these guys. We'll now have plenty of troops, but we just can't really use them because everything the enemy have left are now up on the wall in that really slow fight. We're cutting now to the live footage because not much happens in the rest of the replay, so I didn't bother to capture it. Basically, this fight goes on for the rest of the battle. I spent some time microing it and moving units in and out to get higher stamina units to the front, but this is a very dodgy maneuver because if you order a unit to disengage in Rome 2, they might just rout because that counts as receiving a rear charge if you turn around and then start walking away. So, we continue the fight. We do kill a number of enemies and the towers are shooting into the enemy blob, although because of the slow combat mod the towers are weaker than usual, plus they're weaker than usual in Divide et Impera to begin with, so that doesn't do very much. We get perhaps 200 kills on the towers, and we do take out a couple of thousand enemies. Overall, a successful defense. It just took the entire time limit and there were still enemies there attacking us when the battle stopped. We didn't quite finish their army off. Overall though, a decent result. Now I was about to execute them because I always feel like that's a good option in Total War, but I think in Rome 2 it doesn't work like that. You get more money if you spare captives, and they don't get the captives back. In this case they don't get them back because the army gets deleted, but I think even if the army isn't deleted and you spare the captives, you just get the money and the soldiers disappear as far as I know. Anyway, that aside, we've won that battle. However, as you might have seen, we immediately get besieged again. Then after a turn of the enemy building siege equipment, they attack, so we've circled back around on ourselves. We are facing the same battle that we just fought, only this time we have fewer troops because the damage of the previous battles can't be healed since we're under siege the entire time. Inconvenient. At least in this fight, things were a bit more straightforward because the enemy just attacked the walls nearest to where they deployed. Now I'm using the live battle footage. I didn't film the replay for this one, for reasons that will soon become clear, and those are also the reasons why this episode is going to be a bit shorter than usual. Things started to go wrong, basically. The issue, as I eventually worked out later, is just that because our ranged units aren't very useful, we're kind of wasting unit slots in our army by having all of these slingers, whereas the enemy army just has tons of principes. Principes do have slightly higher stats than hoplites, even when they're in hoplite phalanx formation. So they can just overpower us, and what we see is the enemy swarm through our gates after opening them. I did the same thing as before where I used my jabs to kill their general. That worked well enough, but it doesn't cause everything to rout or anything like that, and we're still facing just loads of stuff, and our formations are kind of getting blown apart by the sheer amount of stuff. So in a sheer stat war, which it is now becoming, we can't win. We don't have the numbers or the stats to defeat the enemy in melee, and there's not too much we can do to out-morale them either. My one hope is to have the Lancers here come around and rear-attack the enemy blob, maybe get some routes going, but because we're facing generally mid-tier and above Roman units, their morale is higher than most things in the game. So just running into the back of them like this, even against the lighter units, doesn't necessarily make them rout even after the general's gone. And if you can't make them rout, then you can't really do anything because the shock cav are exhausted, they're weak, they can't make many decent attacks through this gate, so actually killing the enemy with the shock cav is not really going to happen. And what we soon see is that we're just being depleted. We're able to hold the enemy in place because they're so distracted fighting the odd unit. But I, at this stage, am starting to run back to a choke point further up the city, thinking, well, we're going to have to run the timer down on this battle. There's no way we can kill them. It's taken us this long to get to this stage. We're not killing the enemy at any particular rate, so we have to wait for them to leave. Unfortunate, but it's the way it is. I also realised by doing a rare move and checking the stats on my and their units that their units are a bit better than mine, and perhaps more importantly, when our guys are in hoplite phalanx, they lose something like 10 damage out of, say, 20 that they have, in exchange for getting 2 melee defense, taking them from like 20 to 22. So I'm not sure being in phalanx really helps us. At least our general's unit, which has higher stats than everything else, actually holds out very well and starts defeating some of these exhausted enemy units as they come upon the front of our phalanx. But at this stage you can see the timer is being run down. That's what I was doing just with that delaying action. Meaning after all that, we win the battle, but we lost basically everything to achieve it. A Pyrrhic victory, half the army's dead, and it was the good half. The half that's left are just like slingers and stuff. So while the enemy also lost half of their army, that doesn't matter so much for them. We're stuck in a dangerous situation. It might have been okay if I had a turn now because I could recruit or just grab a bunch of mercenaries or something. But no, more stuff comes in, a small army, then a big army, and we face another siege assault in the same turn. So again, a difficult situation. This is a harder battle than the one we just fought, and now we don't have any troops. So with this, the only hope to win was to go for a timer rundown. In this case, you can see I tried to run around the outside of the capture point with some cav so that the enemy could never cap it, while everything else just faced the enemy army one unit at a time to buy as much time for us as possible. We got quite far through the battle, but we didn't have many units, so ultimately we didn't get the timer win I was going for. A decisive defeat, and that would be the end of the campaign basically. We got screwed, and Rome was nowhere near close to running out of stuff to throw at us either. So I thought, well, let's try and improve our situation. One thing I could do is increase the damage on defense towers to counteract the slow combat mod somewhat. I don't know how much to increase them by, because I don't know what the mod does. I didn't actually say. Maybe I need to double it or something, I don't know. I increased it a bit, I think maybe 50%. Don't even really remember. The other thing I had in mind was that we could reduce the battle time limit. We're exploring new areas of exploit that I've never even gone to before. I'm not above trying to win on the time limit, but actually reducing the time limit before the battle to make it easier to do so. This is new exploit ground. So we can make it so that if we survive for 20 minutes we automatically win, which combined with the slow combat mod means that if we just delay things enough, then we should be fine. I was checking out here to see whether my newly upgraded towers will be doing any more significant damage. We saw before they got maybe a couple of hundred kills throughout a battle, but because the enemy can capture the walls quite fast, they're not going to be firing very much. And we never get above 1% fire damage on the ladders, so no hope of taking those things out. Anyway, I looked around and saw, well, not much damage was done, maybe the odd kill here and there, but it didn't seem too impressive. It was so unimpressive that I actually stood and fought under the tower after the enemies captured it, which proved to be a terrible decision, because upon closer inspection those towers are annihilating me. You can see the difference between a unit that is and isn't under tower fire while the battle is happening. We're taking way more losses on the units on both flanks here that are getting shot. So because of that, I thought we have to move this fight to be outside of the tower's range. However, in Divide et Impera, towers actually have much greater range than they do in vanilla to perhaps counteract their reduced damage and accuracy. So we have to move very far away to get out of range. And because we're moving hoplites, that's not really going to happen. They can only walk even out of phalanx formation. If you order them to run, they just walk a bit faster. So we're easily rear attacked the whole way back. Our units get completely obliterated. Luckily that was towards the end of the fight, so it all gets timed out real soon. But even with those exploits and with the defensive upgrades I thought would help, it actually went, well, perhaps worse. Everything is still dead, it just died faster. And the enemy army is less dead than before. We didn't really put much of a dent in them. So that was a shame. I started thinking, we're actually in trouble here. Is there any way in this campaign to hold Rome? My next plan though was to think back to Warhammer, because I'd had this problem before trying to do siege defenses in Warhammer and feeling like my defenses weren't really helping in any way. And in that game, what you have to do is just defend the outside of a town so that your towers will shoot for more of the battle. Here was my attempt to do that. It didn't work even a little bit. Look at this. The enemy ladders just push apart my phalanx below the tower and keep going. It doesn't even stop the ladders as they go through the phalanx. We're being annihilated. This is a pretty good exploit being used by the AI, and it allows them to not only take the now pretty much undefended bits of wall, but it's moved their units to be behind the phalanx, so in cases where they don't climb up the ladder after setting it up, which was most cases, they just turned around and charged the back of the hoplite phalanx. In this fashion we lost like half of our hoplite line pretty fast. The left half was less surrounded and sort of held on, got the delaying action that I wanted to happen going, where the enemy haven't taken the towers nearby, and we are fighting a melee beneath the tower, so gradually the enemy will take damage and then take casualties as those towers start to do something. I'm also doing some micro to take out their general. That ultimately worked out in the end. And with a bit more micro and lots of lancer charges in the more open space we have outside the town, I was gradually able to kill and rout the main bulk of the enemy force, which had indeed been weakened by those towers. They certainly lost hundreds of troops to the towers. You can see I had to sacrifice a whole bunch of stuff to stop the enemy from capturing the towers. But eventually we get that chain rout, and again we win the battle. But again, we've won it in such a fashion that it doesn't really help us. We won it, but we still lost most of our army doing so. What I need here is a big win so that we can just go straight on and fight another battle afterwards, which is what happened every time we fought this. We had to just fight the second army immediately after. So we need a way to defend Rome in a very decisive fashion, and so far I haven't found it. Increasing the tower damage didn't help, trying a timer exploit didn't help, and setting up right outside the walls, I really thought that would help, but it didn't help either. There are still more options we can explore. We can go lower, we can put the difficulty on easy, I could just straight up mod the game to give my units higher stats, although I'm not really willing to stoop to that level. I only like to stoop to levels where it's also going to harm me, like the tower thing. That's going to harm me a lot in the future because obviously we'll make more siege attacks than defenses in principle, so we're buffing the enemy more than we're buffing ourselves with that one. willing to make that trade-off just so that the campaign can continue with its gimmick. But I'll have to go and find out if we actually can continue after this. I'm going to try and find a way to win this battle in a great way so that we can then win the battle immediately after, and who knows, there could be another battle we have to face after that.